Hi guys, Mr. Stevens here. Excuse me. We are back with Son of the Morning Star, Custer and the Little Big Horn by Evan S. Connell. And we are going to jump right back in where we left off in the last video. I hope you guys are still enjoying it. And away we go. In Canada, things were different. The Hudson Bay's Company, part of a smoothly functioning empire, understood how to live with Indians, whereas the newly arrived, impatient, disorganized, aggressive Americans did not. They steamed westward, lacerating the earth. George Bent, a half-breed son of a trader, William Bent, mentions emigrant trains several miles long. The huge freight trains with white canvas tops resembled ships at sea. Indians who watched these creaking trains approach every season, growing longer and longer, could foresee the result. Cottonwood groves, where they had camped for generations, began to diminish. Grass in the valleys was eaten down to the ground. With the 1849 gold rush came cholera. The Sioux and Cheyenne, closest to the emigrant road, suffered most, but the epidemic spread northward to the Blackfeet, southward into Kiowa and Comanche territory. Bent visited empty villages where he saw teepees full of bodies. In the summer of 1853, a longtime trader and recently appointed Indian agent, Thomas Broken Hand Fitzpatrick, traveled among the Cheyennes, Arapahoes, and Sioux. Quote, "They are in abject want of food half the year, and their reliance for that scanty supply in the rapid decrease of the buffalo is fast disappearing. Their women are pinched with want, and their children are constantly crying out with hunger." 1 year after that, when the boy who would become Crazy Horse was 12 or 13 years old, a Mormon's cow wandered close to the Sioux camp just east of Fort Laramie, and a Minneconjou named High Forehead could not resist temptation. Whether he wanted the hide or hungered for steak is the subject of a learned disagreement, and Bent describes the animal as a lame ox straying near the road. George Hyde, a cautious scholar, says a Mormon was, quote, leading a lame or worn-out ox when it was shot, and he considers the Indian's behavior, quote, purely provocative. William Bordeaux, whose grandfather owned a trading post nearby, and who got the story of this incident from a great-aunt named Tripe, says that an immigrant party, quote, left a crippled ox by the wayside. Historian Donald J. Berthrong thinks High Forehead meant to kill the Mormon, but hit the beast instead. In any case, the Sioux tribal elders offered to pay reasonable damages, say $10 or a cow, maybe 2 cows. The facts are lost in the spiral of dust. What does seem clear is that the belligerent Irish lieutenant fresh from West Point, John Grattan, set out to arrest High Forehead. This was both illegal and stupid. It violated a provision of the 1851 Laramie Treaty, which stipulated that Reds and Whites should punish their own malefactors, and it was stupid to send Grattan because the Sioux detested him. He was a familiar type, the apple-green egoist. On various occasions, he had strutted around the post, thrusting a fist at Indians, calling them cowards, warning them to look out. Beyond doubt, Grattan wanted and expected trouble when he left the fort to go after High Forehead. "When I give the order," he told his men, "you may fire as you damned please." His posse included a sergeant, a corporal, 27 luckless troopers, and a frightened interpreter named August Lucien, who was at least half drunk and who rode around shouting that all the Sioux were going to be killed, and he, August, pronounced Wayus by the Indians, he himself was going to eat their hearts. J.P. Dunn in Massacres of the Mountains says this wild bunch consisted of just 19 men. No matter, the crucial element was Grattan's artillery, a 12-pound field piece and a mountain howitzer. Precisely what happened will never be learned. There seems to have been a conference during which Wayus shouted additional insults. The soldiers leveled their guns. The Indians thought they were about to fire. A shot was heard by men watching from the flat roof of Bordeaux's trading post. More shots. Grattan let fly with heavy stuff. William Bordeaux was told by his great-aunt Tripe that the hired man, Dominic Bray, rode up a nearby knoll after the first shots were heard. Bray returned, quote, at great speed to report that the Sioux encampment was boiling. The trader himself and several other men, some of whom were married to squaws, hurried to the camp, but arrived too late. Grattan's conference with the Sioux may have fallen apart because of an outrageous misunderstanding. He may have responded to some remarks as an Indian would by exclaiming, "Hauna, hauna," meaning yes, all right, I agree, but the troopers thought he cried, "Now! Now!" and promptly opened fire. It sounds like a vaudeville skit. It sounds implausible, yet this is why there was no J Company in Custer's regiment. J, when spoken, may be misunderstood as A, and if clumsily written, looks like I. Well, when things quieted down, the drunk interpreter and every white-skin except one lay dead. Private John Cuddy either escaped and managed to hide among some wild rose bushes, or he was protected by Indians who had wisely avoided the confrontation. William Bordeaux said his great-uncle, Swift Bear, found Cuddy in the bushes, bleeding so much that he tried to plug the wounds with sagebrush. Swift Bear carried him to the trading post. Later he was carried to Fort Laramie, where he died. As for Grattan, the Sioux terminated his visit with such extreme prejudice in the form of a 24-hour arrow, one arrow passing completely through his skull. His face must have been pounded to mush with rocks or clubs because he could be identified only by his pocket watch. The single Indian casualty was a Brule chief named Whirling Bear, brave bear, conquering bear, bear that scatters his enemies. He was shot in the back, presumably by Grattan or the drunk interpreter. As a result of all of this, the Sioux came near slaughtering everybody at Bordeaux's trading post, but finally were bought off. Still enraged, they plundered an American Fur Company depot. Then, having some experience with whites, they loaded their mortally wounded chief on a travois and fled north. Whirling Bear soon died. His ceremonially wrapped body was placed on a scaffold beside the Niobrara River, close to the mouth of the Snake. Grattan's soldiers were buried on a plateau in extremely shallow graves, so shallow that a caravan of Mormons en route to the Promised Land about a month later observed cadaverous heads peeping through the sod. Eastern newspapers reported the treacherous massacre of a gallant young West Point lieutenant with all his men, and the public responded, as always, by clamoring for revenge. Nor did it take long for the bad judgment of Grattan and that of his superior who had authorized the arrest of a high forehead to be magically transformed. Their foolishness became a cunning redskin plot. The lame ox had been shot neither for its hide nor its succulent ribs, but in order to lure these brave soldiers out of the fort. An army inspector arrived. He recorded the testimony of witnesses, which testimony was forwarded, along with the inspector's conclusion, quote, "The time has now fully arrived for teaching these barbarians how to appreciate and respect the power, the justice, the generosity, the magnanimity of the United States." What this meant was that 2 generations of delicate but peaceful coexistence would be replaced by a generation of savagery. Arapahoes and Cheyenne, who had nothing to do with Grattan's folly, remained where they were, encamped near Fort Laramie. Although they had not participated, they were affected. The Cheyenne agent reported that on his next visit they behaved with great insolence, quote, "the sauciest Indians I have ever seen." They galloped around the corral. They fired shots overhead. They demanded that no more emigrants travel the Platte Road. They wanted $4,000 cash. They wanted the rest of the government annuity in guns and cartridges, quote, "and 1,000 white women for wives." Well, Crazy Horse, Curly as he was known then, had been so shocked by the explosive meeting at Fort Laramie that when his people fled north, he left them somewhere along the way. He spent 3 days on a hilltop without food or sleep, hoping for supernatural guidance. He wedged pebbles between his toes and put rocks under his back so that he could stay awake while meditating upon this experience with the whites. At last, weak and dizzy, he thought he saw his horse approach, carrying on its back a warrior who flourished no scalps, whose unbound hair hung below his waist, and who wore a smooth brown pebble behind one ear. The warrior's body had been decorated with hail spots, and a streak of lightning descended from his forehead to his chin. Bullets and arrows attacked him but fell away without touching him. A storm broke, yet he passed through unharmed. People clutched at him, trying to restrain him, but he rode through them with a red-backed hawk flying above his head. Curly did not reveal this manifestation to anybody until he was 16 and ready to become a warrior. From then on, he painted white hail spots on his body and a red lightning bolt down one cheek before going into battle. He tied a brown pebble behind one ear, wore the red-backed hawk on his head, and threw a handful of dust, perhaps symbolic of the storm, across himself and his pony. Except for moccasins and breechcloth, he rode naked. And we will end there for this video. Hope you guys are still enjoying it. We will be back soon with another exciting edition of Son of the Morning Star, Custom Little Bighorn by Evan S. Connell. Thanks for watching, guys. Bye-bye.